Hi, welcome to Amanda's Book Corner. I'm Amanda, and in this video, I'm going to share 10 tricks to help you read more books. So it's January, and for many people, that can mean New Year's resolutions. A common resolution is to read more, specifically to read more books. But if you're not already a reader, how do you make reading a habit? Or if you're like me and you already read a lot, but you want to read even more, how do you squeeze in those extra books? Whether you're not a reader yet, but you want to become one, or whether you're a reader who wants to be even more ambitious with the books you're reading, here are 10 ways that you can make reading a habit and read more books in 2022. These tips should be helpful for beginners and established bookworms alike. So number one, you have to actually make time to read. You have to make reading an actual priority in your life. For a lot of people, they say that they want to read more, but they just don't have time. But if you look at how they're spending their time, they probably do have time, they're just not using it wisely. For many people, this might mean you spend too much time scrolling on your phone, maybe watch too much TV or too many movies. In order to read more, you need to really want to read more. And my advice is to look at how you're spending your time, cut out things that you don't really need to be spending time on, or at least not so much time on, and use that extra time that you've gained for reading. Tip number 2 is about how you make time to read and where you squeeze in reading time in your day. There are 2 different ways to do this. If you're like me, you might like to sit down and read all at once for your day. So I'm not a very fast reader, and to keep up with my reading goals, I read for about 3 hours per day. That's a lot, and I recognize that. And if you're just getting into reading, you don't have to read as much as I do, or for as long as I do. It's completely not necessary. But if you're like me and you want to read all at once, find a time in your day where you're not going to be interrupted or have other expectations of you. So for me, this usually means I'm reading towards the end of the day. Usually I spend the last few hours of the day reading before I go to bed. Maybe if you're a morning person, you might have extra time in the morning to read before you start your day or go to work or whatever you do. On the other hand, you might want to divide up your reading across different times throughout the day. So maybe you want to read one chapter in the morning before you go to work, maybe you want to read another chapter at lunchtime, another chapter when you get home from work, and maybe another chapter or 2 before bedtime. It can also help to look and see where you have free time. So maybe you're at the doctor's office and you're waiting to be called in. That's a great time to get some extra reading in. Or maybe you're on a break at work and that's another great time to squeeze in a few pages. Whatever works for you, whether you want to put all your reading in one chunk in one specific part of the day, or whether you want to spread it out across different times throughout the day, find what works for you and what fits with your schedule and your attention span and the kind of lifestyle you have. Tip number 3 is to make reading a consistent habit. And I can't stress this enough. I think that it's really important to make it a habit, because if you do, then it'll be easier to keep up on reading as much as you want to. Make it a habit to read every single day, or maybe you just want to do it every single weekend, or maybe 3 or 4 days a week. Whatever makes sense for you, as long as it is consistent. So for me, it makes sense to read every single day. A few years ago, after I finished college and I wanted to get back into reading, which was my first love, I decided to make reading a daily habit. What I did is I started by reading for about half an hour a day. Half an hour was very easy for me to find in my day, and I got used to reading every single day, usually around the same time. And over time, it really formed into an actual habit of mine. Eventually, I started bumping up the amount of time I spent reading. I went from half an hour to a full hour, then later to 2 hours, and now I'm up to about 3 hours. I can't see myself going much beyond that, but you never know. Or if you're someone who gets really into a book and you like to binge the whole thing in one sitting, maybe you just want to set aside time on each weekend to read a whole book. You don't have to read every single day, but if you're reading every Saturday and or Sunday, that can help. Or like I said, maybe you just want to make sure you're reading so many days per week. That's another great way to keep up on your reading goals. I definitely recommend using an app to keep track of your reading habits, or other habits too, actually. I use an app called Strides. And no, this is not an ad, by the way. It's not an ad, I'm just saying something because I use it and I find it really helpful. But in any case, I use an app called Strides, and it allows me to keep track of how many days I've done a certain habit, or whether I've been doing a habit consistently week by week. You can set it up a lot of different ways, but I think it's been really helpful for me to kind of gain that momentum and keep that motivation going to keep reading consistently. As of this recording, I've read 967 days in a row without fail. So I found this app to be super helpful, but you can use another app too. There's lots of different apps, or you can do some kind of journal, whatever works for you to keep track of those habits that you're building. My 4th tip is to keep track of the books you're reading, either using a program or an app, such as Goodreads, or by using some kind of spreadsheet, or maybe a handwritten journal, whatever works for you. Personally, I use both Goodreads and 2 separate spreadsheets. Yes, 2, there's reasons for that, but I don't need to get into it. You only need 1, honestly. But I find that keeping track of the books you've read, when you've read them, maybe keeping track of how much you liked the books, that can be super helpful. It can be really helpful to see how many books you've read, and that can help you stay on track with your goal, but it can also be a motivational boost for you. I know it's a little bit nerdy, but personally I get pretty excited looking at my spreadsheets and seeing how many books I've read and just keeping track of them in that way. I find it really motivational, and I also like to keep track of other things about the books. Things like genre and what kind of diversity the books have and whether the books are new or whether I got them this year, things like that. I guess I'm kind of a stats nerd, but anyway, it can be really helpful both for tracking and for motivation. Goodreads is probably the most popular app to use, but there are others as well, like Listly or Storybook. There's a lot of different options, and they each have their own different perks. Spreadsheets, whether in Excel or Numbers or Google Sheets, those can be super helpful. You can set them up yourself, or you can use different templates that are available. I personally copied a template from Book Riot, and you can do so too. I'll include the link below. And of course, there's good old-fashioned handwritten journaling. I don't do that so much, although it does kind of appeal to me, but there's a lot of different journals you can get. Journals that are designed specifically for that, or you can just pick up a general one and design it the way you want to. Tip number 5 is to join a book club. If you're someone who does best when there's someone around to hold you accountable, or you need some kind of external motivation, having a book club is a great way to keep you on track with your reading goals. Whether you join or start an in-person book club with your local friends and your neighbors, or whether you decide to join or start one virtually, this can be a great way to not only help you choose books and choose different books outside your comfort zone, it can also help you keep up with reading at least one book per month, depending on how often your book club meets up. Personally, I don't have a lot of friends and family local to me who are really into reading, and so for me it would make more sense to join a virtual book club. There's a lot of avid readers out there who don't have friends or family to really connect with about their passion of reading, so you can connect with them online. There's plenty of different groups you can join, and it can be a really great way to make friends, form deeper connections, and also keep you on your reading goal. Consider how often you want your book club to meet. Do you want it to be weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, maybe every other month or quarterly? Figure out what kind of schedule would work for you and what kind of reading pace you'd be able to keep up with. You should also consider what kind of books the book club reads, because you want to be in a book club that reads books that you like, both in terms of the genre and the topics within the books. I'm not currently in a book club. I was for about 6 months and I found it to be really interesting, but it's definitely something that I would consider joining again. Tip number 6 is to listen to more audiobooks. Yes, audiobooks completely count as reading. Don't let anyone tell you they don't, because they absolutely do. Personally, I only started getting into audiobooks in the last couple of years. Audiobooks are a great way to multitask during your day. So for me, I listen to them while I do the dishes, sometimes while I do certain chores around the house. I listen to it when I take a shower as well. I have a shower speaker and Bluetooth headphones, so both of those are really helpful with being able to hear the audiobook well while you're doing these different tasks. If you commute or travel a lot, audiobooks are a great way to make that commute more enjoyable. Perhaps you like to garden, and maybe gardening is a great time for you to listen to an audiobook. Audiobooks are great for multitasking, and they can make your time doing other tasks more enjoyable. Personally, I find that I enjoy the dishes a lot more now that I have audiobooks to help me out. The only time I don't really recommend listening to audiobooks is while exercising. I like to run on the elliptical, and I found that listening to audiobooks actually makes me run more slowly, and it makes me feel more tired while running. I find that music, especially music with a high BPM, really helps me run. So I can't say audiobooks are great for exercising, especially if it's cardio and you're trying to move fast, although for walks it probably would be good. But in any case, listening to audiobooks is a sneaky way to get more books into your day without really adding anything extra to how you're spending your time. Tip number 7 is to read shorter books. You don't have to go out there and read 500-page tomes. It's completely okay to read books that are only a couple hundred pages or even less. Read novellas and short stories. Read short story collections. Maybe a book of poetry. There are a lot of different books out there that you can read in much less time that still completely count as reading. This can also help you build up that momentum and that confidence when you're starting out on trying to read more. These are also books that can help when you don't have as much time to commit to reading, or you don't have much of an attention span for reading just yet. There are also plenty of actual novels that are only about 200 pages, even a little bit less, that completely count as well. So look into books that are shorter if you want to squeeze in a higher number of books that you're reading. My 8th tip is under-discussed, but in my opinion, very, very important. Be cognizant of what kind of genres you like to read and which ones you read more quickly. Not all books can be read at the same speed. I can't read a classic novel from the 1800s as quickly as I can read a more modern novel. I also find that I read certain genres more quickly. I read thrillers and romances and YA novels much more quickly than I read, for example, literary fiction. Another thing is that if you like a book and if you like a genre of book, you're more likely to want to keep reading it and read it more quickly. Part of why thrillers and romances and YA books read so fast is not only because they tend to be more dialogue heavy or have shorter sentences and shorter paragraphs. Another part of it is that they just have more momentum to them that keeps you engaged and keeps you wanting to know what happens next. When you're more engaged, you naturally read just a little bit faster, and that can make a book go by more quickly. On the other hand, certain genres just take more attention, more time. They have a quieter and slower pace to them, and they can take more time, and they can absolutely be completely worth reading. A lot of my favorite books are more literary fiction or historical fiction, and a lot of them do take more time to read. But if you want to read more, consider which ones you enjoy the most and which ones you read more quickly than others. This leads directly to tip number 9, which is to be cognizant of whether you're actually enjoying a book you're reading. If you're really enjoying a book, you're going to be more motivated to go back to it and keep reading it. You're going to be excited to read it, and that will make you more likely to finish the book in a quicker amount of time. However, if you're not enjoying a book, it's going to feel more like a chore to pick it up. You're not going to be as excited. You're not going to read as much at a time, and it's just going to slow down your reading. Now, this has been a hard lesson for me, and I still don't like to do it very often, but if you're not enjoying a book, don't keep reading it. Just stop reading the book, DNF it, that means do not finish, DNF the book, and move on to another book that you're actually more excited to read. Trust me, this will keep your enjoyment of reading a lot higher, it'll make you read a lot more, and it'll make you get through a lot more books in the year. I think there's an art to DNFing a book, and I might make a video about that soon. I'm not one who likes to DNF a book after one chapter. Usually I like to give a book at least 50 pages, even 100 pages before I decide to quit it. But it's up to you, and it depends on what your actual reading goals are. Another thing to consider when you DNF a book is that just because you stop reading it doesn't mean you don't have to ever go back to it. Sometimes you DNF a book because you don't like it and you're not going to get back to it at all, and that's fine. Get rid of the book, move on to other books that you like. But sometimes you're reading a book and you just find that you're not in the right mindset right now, and that's completely okay. If you're not in the mood for this kind of book but you want to read it in the future, set it aside and either pick up where you left off in the future or start it again in the future, depending on how much you remember what you've read. But yeah, don't be afraid to DNF a book. It's okay. My 10th and final tip might be a little bit controversial, but here it is. Don't be afraid of abridged books. Now, I'm normally one who likes to read the entire book, unabridged, everything that's in it. But sometimes you need to read a book, but you don't want to read the entire thing, or you want to skim kind of the extra stuff in there that you don't really need. So for example, maybe you need to read a business book for your job, and you want to get the important bits out of it, but you don't want to read all the extra stuff. It's completely okay to get an abridged version of a book, if one exists, and read that instead. This could also work for the classics. I think a lot of classics do come in abridged versions as well. Classic books tend to not only be longer, but they also tend to have more difficult language and reference things, which kind of just make it a slower read. So if you're not too precious about reading the full unabridged version of the classic, but you want to know what the story is, it's okay to read an abridged version of it and get the main point of the story without all the extra side plots or scenes that don't really move the novel forward that much. So those are my 10 tips to read more books, and if you have any other tips you'd like to share, please let me know in the comments because I'm sure they'd be very helpful. And let me know if any of these tips help you in your reading journey this year. Whatever your reading goal is this year, there are ways to read more, to make sure you're enjoying what you're reading, and to keep track of what you're reading and make it a real habit. Whether you want to read for 10 minutes a day or 3 hours a day, it's completely up to you. Just make sure that you're having fun while reading. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. And to make sure you don't miss any more of my videos, please ring the bell to get all the notifications. I publish about 2 book review videos every week, and once a week I also put out videos like this one. So thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!